Welcome to Cash Talk Podcast, where we make money simple by breaking down the biggest financial concepts in plain, everyday English. Let's get started.
Quick question before we start. When you see someone driving an expensive car, a Ferrari, a Porsche, a fully loaded Range Rover, what's your first thought? Be honest.
Probably something like, they made it. They're successful. I want that.
Right. And Housel's going to completely dismantle that instinct today, because it turns out the thing we're actually reacting to is not wealth. It's something entirely different. And understanding the gap between those two things might be the most practically useful thing in this entire book.
Also, we're going to talk about something that sounds almost counterintuitive. Why being wrong most of the time is actually fine, and why the investors and executives who understand that outperform everyone who doesn't.
This is Cash Talk Podcast. I'm Ali.
I'm Sarah. Episode 3 of our Psychology of Money series. Quick recap before we go. Episode 1, why smart people make terrible money decisions, and how your personal financial history shapes your behavior in ways you don't control. Episode 2, the trap of never enough, the hidden math of compounding, and why staying wealthy requires a completely different skill set than getting wealthy. If you haven't listened to those, go back. Every episode in this series connects.
Let's go.
3 terms today, fast.
First, tail events. In statistics, a tail refers to the extreme end of a distribution, outcomes that are very rare but very impactful. In investing, a tail event is that one investment out of dozens that returns 50 times your money and makes up for everything else. The idea is that a very small number of events account for a disproportionate share of all outcomes. Most things don't matter much. A few things matter enormously.
Second, autonomy. This is a word Household doesn't always use directly, but it's underneath the entire chapter on freedom. Autonomy means the ability to make your own choices about your time, your work, your schedule. Research consistently shows it's one of the strongest predictors of happiness, more than income, more than status, the feeling of being in control of your own day.
And third, rich versus wealthy. These sound like synonyms. They are not. Rich is visible, high income, expensive things, outward displays. Wealthy is invisible, assets you haven't spent, savings, investments, options. You can be rich and not wealthy. You can be wealthy and look completely ordinary. Ronald Reed from The Janitor from episode 1 with $8 million, that's wealthy. The guy who leased a Ferrari and got it repossessed, that's trying to look rich.
Okay, chapter 6. Tails, you win.
So chapter 6 starts with this art dealer named Heinz Berggren, fled Nazi Germany in 1936, came to the U.S., studied literature. Nobody in his early life would have predicted he'd become one of the most successful art dealers in history.
By the 1990s, Berggren owned one of the most extraordinary collections in the world: Picasso's, Braque's, Klee's, Matisse's. In 2000, he sold part of it to the German government for over 100 million euros. The private market value was over $1 billion.
And the question is, how? Art is completely subjective. How do you build a billion-dollar collection?
And Household quotes an investment research firm that gave maybe the most honest answer possible. The great collectors bought vast quantities of art. They didn't pick masterpieces. They bought everything they could, held it in portfolios, sat, and waited for a few winners to emerge. That's all.
Maybe 99% of what Berggren bought was worth very little, but the 1% that included Picasso made up for all of it, and then some. He could be wrong most of the time and still end up spectacularly right.
And this is exactly how venture capital works. If a VC firm makes 50 investments, they expect half to fail, maybe 10 to do okay, and 1 or 2 to be massive, generating returns that cover the entire fund. Household cites data over 21,000 venture financings between 2004 and 2014. 65% lost money. About 1% made more than a 20x return. Half of 1% made more than 50x. That's where essentially all of the industry's returns came from.
Now, here's the part that catches most people off guard.
The stock market works the same way.
People think of venture capital as high risk, high tail, and public markets as safer, more stable. But Household pulls data on the Russell 3000, a broad index of public companies, since 1980.
40% of all those companies lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered. Effectively, all of the index's overall gains came from just 7% of the companies.
A boring, diversified index behaves almost exactly like a venture portfolio. A few big winners carry everything.
Amazon's growth since its founding is almost entirely because of two things: Amazon Prime and Amazon Web Services. The rest, the Fire Phone, the travel agency experiments, the dozens of failed product lines, largely didn't matter. Two tail events drove the entire company.
Same with Apple. The iPhone is a tail event in tech product history. One device accounts for the majority of Apple's value. Everything else is secondary.
And Housel makes this point that I think is genuinely important for investors. He says, if you look at Warren Buffett's investing history, he has owned 400 to 500 stocks in his lifetime. By his own admission, most of his money came from about 10 of them. Charlie Munger followed up at a Berkshire shareholder meeting and said, if you remove just a few of Berkshire's top investments, the long-term track record is pretty average.
The greatest investor in history made most of his gains from roughly 2% of his picks, and the rest of the time he was just holding, waiting, not panicking.
Which brings Housel to the actual practical lesson, and I think this is underappreciated. He talks about three investors: Sue, Jim, and Tom. Sue invests $1 every month in the stock market from 1900 to 2019, rain or shine, no matter what the economy's doing.
Jim sells during recessions and buys back in after. Tom is a little slower, sells a few months into a recession, buys back in a few months after it ends.
Sue ends up with $435,000. Jim ends up with $257,000. Tom with $234,000.
Sue wins by a massive margin, not because she was smarter about timing, because she didn't try to time at all. She just stayed. And here's the kicker. Of those 1,428 months between 1900 and 2019, only about 300 were during recessions. So by just staying calm during 22% of the time, just not panicking during recessions, Sue ended up with 3/4 more money than the people who tried to be clever.
Housel has a quote here that I love. He says, your success as an investor will be determined by how you respond to the punctuated moments of terror, not the years spent on cruise control. Like a pilot, hours and hours of boredom punctuated by sheer terror. The boredom is fine. It's the terror you have to navigate without flinching.
And this is why Chris Rock tests his material at small clubs in New Jersey before touring arenas. He performs 40 or 50 shows in small venues, fumbling through jokes, throwing half of them out. What you see on Netflix is the tail end of hundreds of attempts. We see the hit, we don't see the failures that were necessary to find it.
Tails drive everything. Most things fail, a few things work. The skill is staying in long enough for the wins to show up, and not being knocked out by the losses in the meantime.
Housel opens with what he calls the highest form of wealth. And it's not a number. It's this: the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today.
He cites a researcher named Angus Campbell, a psychologist who spent decades studying what actually makes people happy. And after all that research, more than salary, more than house size, more than education level, more than almost anything else measurable, the single strongest predictor of well-being was this: a strong sense of control over your own life.
Not what you own, not what you earn, whether you feel like you are the one making decisions about your time.
And Housel is very personal in this chapter. He talks about how in college he desperately wanted to work in investment banking, purely because of the money.
He landed a summer internship at an investment bank in LA, thought he'd won the career lottery.
And then?
First day, he realized why investment bankers get paid so much. They work hours that most people can't physically sustain. Going home before midnight was considered a luxury. There was a saying in the office: if you don't come in on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday.
Brutal.
He loved the work itself. He wanted to work hard. But then he hit on something really important. He says, doing something you love on a schedule you can't control can feel exactly the same as doing something you hate.
Which is a line I think a lot of people need to hear, because we tell ourselves, if I just find the right job, if I just find my passion, everything will be fine. But it's not just what you do, it's when you do it and who controls the decision.
Psychologists call this reactance. When you feel like someone else is controlling your choices, even if you'd made the same choice freely, the loss of agency itself creates unhappiness. You resent the very thing you might have loved if you'd chosen it yourself.
Housel tells a story about a guy named Derek Sivers, a successful entrepreneur. Sivers worked a regular job in Manhattan, paying $20,000 a year. He never ate out, never took a cab, lived on about $1,000 a month, earned $1,800, and saved the rest. After 2 years, he had $12,000.
And with that $12,000, at 22 years old, he quit his job and became a full-time musician. He knew he could cover his costs with occasional gigs. He was free.
A friend later asked him to finish the story, the part about when he sold his company, and Sivers said, "No, that's the story. The $12,000 was the story. Everything after that was just more numbers in a bank account. The freedom happened at 22.
That moment, $12,000 that bought him the ability to say no to a job he didn't want, that was more valuable to him than the millions that came later.
And Housel backs this up with real data. Median family income in America has more than doubled since 1955, adjusted for inflation. Houses are twice the size, cars are faster, TVs are better. And yet, surveys consistently show Americans are not significantly happier than they were in the 1950s. Stress levels are higher, not lower.
Because what we've done with our increased wealth is buy bigger stuff. But the cost of that bigger stuff, the longer hours, the email at midnight, the job you can never fully leave, has eaten into the one thing that actually drives happiness: control over your time.
He makes this point about how modern work has changed. In 1870, most jobs were physical, farming, manufacturing. You clocked out and you were done. Your body was the tool, and you left it at the factory.
Now, 38% of jobs are managerial or professional, decision-making jobs where your brain is the tool, and your brain never clocks out. You're thinking about a work problem in the shower, at dinner, at 3 a.m. The job never fully ends.
So what's the takeaway? Housel is saying the smartest thing you can do with money is use it to buy back control over your time, not the biggest house, not the fastest car. Time. Options, the ability to say no to things that don't serve you.
A small emergency fund gives you the ability to take a few days off when you're sick without panicking. A little more gives you the ability to wait for the right job instead of taking the first desperate offer. 6 months of expenses means your boss no longer has total power over you because you could survive losing the job. That shift in power, even if you never use it, changes how you feel every single day.
One of those 1,000 elderly Americans Housel quotes from a study on what people wished they'd understood about happiness said, "No one, not a single person, said you should work as hard as possible to make money to buy things. Not one person. What they valued was time with people they loved, control over their days, being present."
Take it from the people who've already been through it.
Chapter 8. And this one is short, but it might permanently change how you think about status symbols.
Housel goes back to his days as a valet. He got to drive incredible cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Rolls-Royces, and he wanted one desperately because he thought owning a car like that would signal to others, I made it, I'm smart, I'm successful, look at me.
But here's what he actually noticed as a valet. When a Ferrari pulled up, everyone looked at the car. Nobody looked at the driver.
He says, when you see someone driving a nice car, you rarely think, wow, that person is cool. You think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool.
The car triggers the observer's desire for admiration, not admiration of the owner.
And this is the paradox. People buy status symbols because they want to be respected and admired. But the people who see those status symbols are mostly just using them as a benchmark for their own desire to be respected and admired. They're not actually directing that admiration at the owner.
Housel says he was gawking at the Ferraris every day as a valet, and he's sure the owners noticed him gawking. They probably felt admired. But did they know he didn't give them a second thought? That he was only imagining himself in the driver's seat?
The owner bought the car to generate admiration. The observer projected themselves into the car instead of projecting admiration onto the owner.
Both people walked away with a completely wrong impression of what just happened.
And this applies to houses, jewelry, clothes, watches, everything we use to signal status. Housel's not saying don't buy nice things, he's saying be honest about why you're buying them. If it's because you genuinely love the thing, great. But if it's because you want other people to think you're successful, that part probably isn't working the way you think.
He puts it directly. Humility, kindness, and empathy will earn you more genuine admiration than horsepower ever will.
Which is a slightly uncomfortable thing to hear, but it's also kind of freeing, right? Because it means you don't have to buy all those things to get what you actually want, which is to be respected.
The things you actually want can't be purchased with the things you think will buy them.
Chapter 9, and this connects directly to the man in the car paradox.
We tend to judge wealth by what we can see: cars, houses, clothes, Instagram, because that's the only information we have. We can't see someone's bank account or their investment portfolio, so we use visible signals to estimate financial success.
But Housel makes a point that is almost obvious once you hear it, and yet almost nobody lives by it. Spending money on a thing makes you have the thing, and not the money. The visible signal of wealth is, by definition, money that is no longer wealth.
He tells the story of a guy from his valet days, a regular guest he calls Roger. He drove a Porsche. Everyone assumed he was doing extremely well. And then one week, Roger shows up in an old Honda, and the next week, and the week after that. Housel finally asks, what happened to the Porsche?
It was repossessed. Roger had defaulted on the car loan. No shame in his voice, apparently, just matter of fact. And Housel says LA is full of Rogers. Someone driving a $100,000 car might be wealthy, but the only thing you actually know from seeing that car is that they have $100,000 less than they did before buying it, or $100,000 more in debt. That is literally all you know.
He makes the distinction between being rich and being wealthy very precisely. Rich is current income. It's visible. A high salary, expensive things. You can spot rich people because they often go out of their way to be spotted. Wealthy is different. It's income you didn't spend, assets, options, flexibility. Invisible by definition.
And here's the line that stuck with me. Wealth is the nice car you didn't buy, the watch you didn't get, the first-class upgrade you declined. Wealth is financial assets that haven't yet been converted into the stuff you see.
He quotes investor Bill Mann, "There's no faster way to feel rich than to spend lots of money on nice things. But the way to be rich is to spend the money you have and not spend the money you don't have." And Housel pushes that even further. The only way to actually be wealthy is to not spend the money you do have.
And there's a painful truth in here for people who want to accumulate wealth but don't know how. He says, we're good at learning by imitation. We watch what successful people do and copy them. But because wealth is hidden, because the wealthy people around you often look ordinary, we can't see what to imitate.
Ronald Reed, the janitor with $8 million, he was nobody's financial role model while he was alive because every penny of his wealth was invisible. There was nothing to observe or copy. You couldn't see the behavior that built the wealth.
Compare that to someone who's deeply in debt but drives a Ferrari and lives in a house they can barely afford. That person is very visible, and everything they see signals success, so people imitate the wrong model.
Housel puts it like this. Imagine trying to learn to write if you couldn't read. No examples to imitate, no techniques to observe. Wealth works the same way. The best examples are hidden, so we default to imitating the worst ones.
And the practical conclusion is sharp. The world is full of people who look wealthy and aren't. And people who look ordinary and have financial security most of the people around them will never have. Stop calibrating your own financial decisions based on what you can see other people doing. Most of what's visible is not a reliable signal of what's actually there.
Question for this episode, and it's a two-parter.
First question. Think about the last purchase you made to signal something to other people, whether you consciously knew that was the reason or not. A car, an outfit, something for your apartment. Now ask, did the people you were signaling to actually notice? And if they did they think what you hope they'd think?
Second question, what would you do with your time if money genuinely didn't constrain it? Not, I'd travel. Be more specific. Who would you spend time with? What would you work on? How would your days actually look? Because that answer, that specific, honest answer, is what Housel means when he talks about what money is actually for.
Not the car, not the house. The answer to that question.
Recap. Chapter 6, Tail Events Drive Everything. A very small number of wins account for most of the returns in investing, in business, and in almost every creative field. The skill isn't picking only winners, it's surviving long enough for the winners to appear.
Chapter 7. The highest dividend money pays is control over your time. More than salary, more than assets, autonomy over your day is the most reliable predictor of happiness.
Chapter 8. Status symbols don't generate the admiration people think they do. The observer imagines themselves in the car, not the owner.
Chapter 9. Wealth is invisible. It's the stuff you didn't buy, the options you kept open. And because it's invisible, most people accidentally model the wrong behavior.
Now, Episode 4. And here's the tease. We've spent 3 episodes building a framework for understanding how money psychology works. Episode 4 is where Housel gets into the actual rules, the counterintuitive principles that he argues should govern financial decisions.
Things like why being reasonable is more valuable than being rational, why you should save money even if you don't know what for, why your financial plan needs to account for the fact that the person making it will not be the same person living with the consequences.
That last one sounds abstract. It is not abstract. It's one of the most practically important things in the book, and we're going to spend real time on it.
Episode 4. See you there. This is Cash Talk Podcast. I'm Ali.
I'm Sarah. Learn the money, use the English. See you next episode.